Hi, I'm Sam Liu. Welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Sam Liu, welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm, surviving this new way of life that we're all going through.
Good. And long may you continue to.
Yeah, hopefully it ends.
So I want to go all the way back to when you were a kid and you studied illustration and fine art and stuff like that. When you were growing up, what did you want to be? What were your aspirations?
I think maybe it's like a lot of artists, but I know it's kind of similar for I think a lot of people with in my case, obviously, like Asian parents, right? It's like, I think art was something that didn't make sense to them as far as like, how do you make money doing art? And the only thing that you could, make money at was being, and this is what they knew, was just like being a fine artist in a gallery, And so, and that seemed, not like a really smart, business move. I mean, a move for your career, right? It seems like it's a very, you have to be sort of it's a very sort of small top of a pyramid that you have to sort of be in. And so, it's not like being an engineer.
Most successful artists die before they become successful, which is another problem. Like you become successful 700 years after you've done the thing.
Right. But when you're living, you're like Van Gogh, whatever, cutting off your ear and going crazy. You know what I mean? Squalor, basically. So, I mean, it was difficult for me, especially with my dad, who was very strict, and he, obviously he just, being older now, you understand it, but he just wanted me to, be able to have a comfortable life, that type of thing, And I mean, it was something that I had to sort of fight to do, My dad, obviously, I wasn't smart enough to be a lawyer or a doctor, and so, he pushed me towards the engineering field, which was really popular in the 80s. Now that the Cold War is not happening, it's very sort of like the job that, like, if you're kind of smart and you're you have a work ethic, whatever, you can kind of get that job, And so, I have a lot to say about it. So maybe I should just, that's kind of the beginnings anyways.
Yeah. So you graduated and you started working at Image Comics, is that correct?
Oh, yeah. And so, again, comics was another thing that I never really thought, because I picked like illustration because it just seemed like it was a thing that you could have a career in. And like animation, which again wasn't on my radar in the beginning, I just fell into animation. I'll get to that a little bit later, but so Image Comics was exploding at the time. This was like in the early 90s, when Image formed, and comics. That's kind of when the boom was happening. There was a lot of interest from Hollywood. Not quite yet, not quite like the Marvel stuff, but there was a lot of big names that were sort of interested in IPs and comics was sort of the new frontier in a way. And so I got into Image Comics, but again, I say this about my career a lot. I think I've failed way more than I've succeeded, and I've had to fail in order to succeed. I was too slow, and so I couldn't capitalize on sort of the opportunity, I suppose, And so, a lot of.
Do you say drawing? Do you mean?
Yeah, drawings, because it's freelance, and so you get paid per page that you do, right? If you have a bad day and you don't draw the page, you don't get paid, basically.
Right.
And so I still go through it too, but it's hard for me to sort of, work as fast as you need to be able to have a career in comics.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I've got a degree in 2D animation, and in my spare time, if I have spare time, I still enjoy drawing and painting and stuff like that. But I've spent a month on a painting before because it's like, in just one small area trying to get it what I perceive to be perfect. And obviously, when you're working to someone else's time frame, you can't really do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and you get paid per piece that you do, and if you don't produce quickly, you don't get paid a lot.
Right.
Yeah. And that's actually how I stumbled into animation, because, I was in comics. I tried it out for a couple of years, and I just realized I couldn't do it. You know what I mean? I couldn't make a living, doing it. And a friend of mine, he had an instructor in art school that was, I think, the art director at Rhythm and Hughes. Yeah, that big effects house.
They're in California, right?
Yeah.
I know them.
Yeah, like Santa Monica, I think.
Yeah.
But I think they're closed now. So, but anyways, I went and I talked to him, and so at the time, when I was kind of going like, I can't do comics, I had another friend who was in comics also. He was the colorist for Jim Lee at Wildstorm Studios, and he and I, we didn't go to college together, but we always kind of ran into each other because we were both comic book people, but we went to the same college,
Right.
And so when he got a job I worked out with Rob Liefeld in Extreme Studios, and he worked with Jim Lee in Wildstorm Studios. And so, we'd be working late at night, and sometimes we would just call each other and we'd talk at like 4 a.m, while we're working. And we were talking about how rough comics is, and so he had a friend, and he was just like, I'm getting out. And he had a friend who was a director, and Sony Animation had just started.
Yep.
And so he was just like, hey, there's a big animation boom at the time also, because I think like Little Mermaid had just kind of come out. This like the mid 90s, right?
Yeah.
And so he was like, hey, you don't have to have a lot of experience. It's an entry level job, but it pays, really good compared to comic book money. And you get insurance and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And health benefits, and so when I was talking to, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a lot.
No, go for it.
So when I was talking to the art director at Rhythm and Hughes, I was telling him like, I'm looking for a career change, because I can't handle the pace in comics, and so I was like, I sort of have a standing offer to work at Sony in animation, and he was just like, oh, animation. He's just like, I would recommend for any artist to work in animation for at least 2 years. He's like, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to have to draw everything, things that you don't want to draw. You're going to have to draw like cats and horses and, backgrounds and helicopters, and it's just like, it's a great training ground. And so I took it, thinking that I was only going to be there for a couple of years until I got my speed up and, just to see what I would learn and then jump back into comics, right? I ended up staying in animation and it's really weird, and I say this to a lot of like young artists too, is like, you kind of don't know what your path is going to be sometimes, it's just, I mean, how could you, right? You just think that, it's like when you go to college, right? You think that, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a this, and then you have to go to training, or I want to be a lawyer or something, and then you go, I won't say lawyer just because actually I was just thinking about, like, I have a couple of friends that sort of dropped out of law after they sort of went through the whole thing. Because it's kind of like, you realize it's either the thing that you're really interested in or it's kind of not, And so animation, again, it wasn't even on my radar when I was going through school, right? Because I thought animation was just about in-betweening, and that just seemed really like laborious and boring kind of a thing, you know what I mean? But I got into storyboarding, and then eventually directing. And I realized, like, the thing that I really love is storytelling.
Yeah.
And so even when I was in animation, I had gotten a couple of, jobs just from like, old people that I knew when I was in comics, stuff like that, to whether do a pinup or a comic, like a cover or something like that. And I realized, like, I just didn't have the love for it. I just didn't have I loved creating, laying it out, you know what I mean? And sort of figuring it out. But once I had to go in and tightly pencil it and then like shade it and all that kind of stuff, I was just like, oh, this is not me. I'm like, I would think of anything else to do besides that,
Yeah, you want to tell an entire story, not just one frame of it. Yeah.
And it's so much about, I'm sorry, I'm blabbing.
No.
But it's like, when I was in illustration class, I think like when you're new, you're like, oh, if I could do it photorealistic, I mean, that's the peak of what art is,
Right.
But once you get in there and you have to like render the skin and how smooth the thing is, it takes like hours just for the technical part of it, right? And this is kind of, again, the thing that happened with animation versus like spending so much time on like one image and having to shade it and, all the buckles and the, folds and things like that. It's just like, I just kind of want to get the idea down and the composition down And once I sort of have that down, that's when it becomes less interesting to me. Do you know what I mean? And so I think like
you've
a lot of
expressed that.
yeah. Like some people, they love it, and God bless them because it's not me, like they love exploring the bounce lighting and the volume, all the little, the shadow and the core shadow and then the highlight, things like that. But I'm kind of like, there's a certain point where I think mentally I'm done with it. You know what I mean? And so I think like a lot of, again, when I was in art school, with other students, I feel like in the beginning, a lot of people start as being these ultra rendered people, but then when they graduate, they're way looser. Do you know what I mean? Because again, I think their interest is not in, the technical kind of stuff anymore. It's more about sort of like, I got the idea down and I've expressed it in a much quicker way. So I guess that's how I got into animation.
Yeah, I studied traditional animation. Disney would do 24 frames per second, and I thought I'm going to do stuff like that. And then I learned that obviously on TV they do 12 frames per second. And then if you look at like classic 1970s Scooby-Doo episodes, if you watch any character, most of the time they're not actually moving. Like they might change from one position to another because there's so much footage of film that they had to produce that while you may want to do all these beautiful, smooth animations, there normally isn't the time and the constraints of putting a show together. So then you have to pick the most important bits and express them.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of technical things, even though I say like I don't like the technical things, that obviously with any job there's a lot of inherent technical things. And so, and some of it is like the planning, like you're talking about, right? It's like, yes, if we had a feature budget, like a real feature, schedule, like, because a lot of the stuff, working at Warner Brothers now is, we have like 6 months to make it,
Wow.
Versus like a real feature obviously is like years, right? It's like 3 to 5 years
as well.
Well, it's weird because we have about 4-ish months, it's a little bit more than 6 months, you know what I mean? But it's like we have about 4 to 5 months in the beginning of pre-production, right? And then it gets shipped to get animated. And then when it comes back, then we get, so there's a pre, which is a chunk, and then it goes away. And, we work on different projects, and then it comes back, and then we have to sort of do the post on it. So I shouldn't say 6 anymore because it's not really 6, but it's like, 4 or 5 in the front, and then maybe 2, maybe 3 at the end, and then, it's on the shelf, or.
Yeah, I guess it depends how big the animation team is as well, because it would seem massively intimidating to me to produce an hour and a half animated film. Obviously, if there's a big team doing that, taking a scene each, then it's not as big of a deal and you can spread it out more quickly.
Yeah, because we don't have huge teams, but but they're not small either, if that makes sense. I think business-wise, they try to find that sweet spot as far as how many do you need in order to sort of get it out within this time frame kind of thing,
That's great. And so early on, you worked on some huge IP straight away. There was Extreme Ghostbusters. You worked on Starship Troopers, Godzilla. Was it intimidating? This your first project to be working on stuff like that, or did you sort of relish the challenge?
A writer friend of mine, or I should say coworker, because we're not really friends, but I remember he was asked about, translating, these big IPs, especially graphic novels, right? These beloved graphic novels. And his responses, and it's kind of what I think about it too, is like, if you sort of think about it really, and you sit back and you think about it, I think you'd be scared. You know what I mean? You're like, oh shoot, I'm, translating Batman Year One, or The Killing Joke, or something like that, or whatever, The Judas Contract, or Death of Superman, or something like that. But you sort of just have to sort of like look down and just at the work, and you're just trying to sort of do the work. I think if you kind of think of like the gravity of it a little bit, like, I think that would scare me. But because at the time, I think it was just, I was just trying to figure out the job. I was just trying to figure out how do I, and I think it's like in the 90s, or the audience was, I don't know, I was gonna say less cynical, but maybe they're just less vocal because they didn't have
no internet.
Yeah, so you just do it, and for the most part, there's so few of it. I think people they enjoy it more, but I think there's so much now. People are very critical now, So it's everybody has an opinion, and I would say like a couple of years ago doing these, again we're cranking these things out,
Yeah.
It became a point, where I don't know, I was kind of going through a point where I was just like, this is a kind of a thankless job in a way, you know what I mean? Because it's like, no matter what, people are going to like hate what you do. There's a portion of the population that's going to, be very critical about it, and so I don't know, maybe I'm too sensitive or something like that. But like when it first happened, I think it hit me really hard,
Yeah,
And
I think when you've worked overtime and weekends and stuff and poured your heart into something, and then just one comment from someone can completely ruin it almost in a way, can't it? But I think sadly that some people don't get enjoyment from watching things. I think they get enjoyment from tearing them apart. To feel better in some way than the thing that they're criticizing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's inherent or not. I mean, I'm guilty of some of that too when I was younger, definitely. But I think just now, like anybody can say something. Do you know what I mean? And they can just throw their voices out there and stuff, and somebody's going to see it. I mean, I think there's a certain point where it's constructive, and there's a certain point where it's just like it's just it's just to make yourself feel better or them to feel better or something like that. And some of it is just. I mean, most of it is purely taste anyways. Do you know what I mean? And so it's hard. I mean, we joke about it at the studio too. It's like, our lineup of, superhero movies, it's like every list is different. You know what I mean? Obviously there's ones that, there's these 5 usually end up in the top 10 or something like that. But sometimes you'll get people's lists and you're like, whoa, that one's their favorite one, or, oh, they hate this one or something like that. Yeah. So it's just tough sometimes, you know what I mean? Because I think we know the stuff that I've been working on, for the last, like 5-6 years or whatever has been like these direct-to-video things that are like movies, but they're not really movies because, we can't compete with, you know what I mean? People that have a 3 to 5 year, production life cycle. And again, our movies are like $3 million, you know what I mean? Versus theirs are like 100 million to 150 million, and I get it. It's like it's sort of in the same, it's marketed in the same category, but we can't really compete. You know what I mean? But it's hard because we get criticized as if we're going against How to Train Your Dragon or something like that. And,
sure. See, conversely, I kind of think that you do compete with them. I'm specifically talking about superhero movies. I would say there's a higher level of consistency in animated DC movies than there is in general other superhero films. But they really do vary in quality, a lot of superhero films that are just released in general. Whereas the DC ones, there's great voice acting and they always look stunning, and the stories you pick from such a rich history of graphic novels, and there's always something you can get from them, which I don't think you always have that consistency in live action.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's why I stay at Warner Brothers, because obviously a lot of it comes from, and this is just my opinion,
of course.
But I mean, well, this part isn't really my opinion, but I work with some great people, what I mean, like Bruce Timm, and the people sort of that kind of grew up from him, like the James Tuckers and stuff like that. Bruce is a really interesting person because, he's not necessarily formally trained, but he has great instincts, and on so many levels. I mean, because a lot of people know him as whether it's just, he's just the artist, he draws, his style looks a certain way, but he's great at editing. He's, again, great at like, music, we don't know music, but again, just working with him and the decisions that he makes, he's very, very close to the vest, I mean? So I think a lot of times he doesn't look foolish because he does, I mean, this could be either a criticism or, a compliment, but he only extends himself so far. Do you know what I mean? Because in a lot of stuff, even like say even the voice of Batman, with Kevin Conroy, even, you know what I mean? Like, there's a tendency for actors that want to sort of, I mean, and most creatives, right? They just want to do the most splashy thing, right? They want to do the most, they want to, like, again, a lot of actors want to, emote and express, but Bruce Timm always tells them less is more, he's just like, that's too much. You know what I mean? Like Batman needs to be contained, and I think that's partially why it's so iconic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because again, it's very easy to go off the rails sometimes. Do you know what I mean? And I think with when we're making these things too, it's like we have to really understand the characters and their motivations and make sure that they're in their lane. You know what I mean? And I think that's what sort of makes them powerful and makes them sort of iconic, because they don't sort of cross over each other and become the same person or the same things. And so there's a lot of simplification that kind of happens, but there's a lot of precision that we're trying to do, because even in the animation, because we're subject to animation just like every other studio, but I think a lot of it is the heads, again, like the people that are making the decisions, because there's times when the animation comes back and we're crying because we're just like, this looks so bad. This is the worst thing. How are we going to save it? And like, do we take our names off of it? Blah, 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 I remember, just recently even, I remember Bruce, I'm taking my name off. Maybe this is the one. This is finally the one. It always shapes up, because, again, we're not unlimited budget, but we have to be very picky in what we make a call, because we can't fix everything. You know what I mean?
Right.
If there's 100 things, maybe we get 10 of them. You know what I mean? Maybe we get 5 of them. And so you got to pick the 5 worst things, or sometimes you live with certain things, or sometimes you just edit it, and it's the editing process is really amazing. And a lot of it's taking out frames, a lot of it is, it's like the setup isn't kind of good, but we can do tricks. Like we have the animation of a mouth movement, but we'll just have the editor sync the mouth as dialogue, so it's really fun. And I think that's the funnest part about the job, is it's scary, because again, it's like you're thrown into this room and then you're just like, okay, this is what you got to work with. Now make something out of it. You know what I mean? And sometimes when, we feel like we saved it or we made it better than it's supposed to be, we're patting each other on the backs and stuff like that. So, I don't know. It's kind of sadomasochistic in a way.
When they're available, I always love listening to audio commentaries, because even I've seen some bad movies over the years, just in general, but sometimes I'll just out of curiosity get a film if it's cheap and listen to the audio commentary. And sometimes the journey of what they went on to make that film was so incredible, and it could have been like so much worse. They hadn't have done the things they've done, or when they just sometimes the stuff on screen that they can't explain why they've done it, but once you actually hear the stories behind that, it brings the films to life in different ways. So I really love that about that. And I think people think these films just magically exist, but they're not. They're crafted, and nobody ever wants to make a bad film. And it's amazing what the end result can be, as you say, through editing and just adding a soundtrack, or having a character not face the camera and have them add a new piece of dialogue.
Oh yeah. I have so much appreciation for music and sound effects, because there have been things where the animation comes back and we're looking at fight scenes, let's just say, right, and we can just go like, oh my gosh, this fight is so boring, or it's like it's not exciting, and then you do some editing and then you put sound effects on, and then you put the music going into it, because I think a lot of like what I talk about now, and when I'm trying to express things either to my teams and stuff like that through like storyboarders and stuff like that, is like there's a flow that kind of happens, you know what I mean? And I think that's the thing that either emotionally, captures the audience, and sometimes that does a lot, if you can sort of get them emotionally invested, and then once this thing happens and you have the right music and the right, and the right sound effects and sort of the right stings, like. Certain things that, again, if you listen to it with the sound off, it just may look like, oh, it's just a headshot of a close up, and then you're panning up somebody and stuff like that, and then there's somebody standing on the roof, But when you have the music, it becomes like 10 times more exciting, So,
and everything that's come before it as well, because when you're just working on a scene, you don't have the emotion that the audience has from having watched everything that's just preceded.
Yeah. And so, again, like that stuff is tricky, and we don't catch it all the time, especially with like James Tucker, in his line, which is the continuity ones, the ones that sort of have the same sort of animation style all the time.
Right.
Like, nobody had told, because, when we get those projects, right, he had this sort of mandate of like, okay, we're going to use sort of how we're going to pick a house style, and that's going to be the house style, right? And a lot of it has to do with, production purposes, because again, we have a very limited, and sometimes we don't get no ramp up time, And so when we have to populate a world, somebody has to draw that, right? And so that's the whole point. That was the point of the sort of continuity thing, was so we can sort of slowly start populating, this world. And so when we're telling the story, we'll have a library of people we can pick from, whether it's backgrounds, characters, and stuff like that, and that's just so we can get to telling the story, And so, some people get angry because it's like, oh, that's the same, pregnant lady from this other, thing, where like, but that's just a person on the sidewalk, I mean, that's not the point of it, because a lot of times, again, we do things because yes, if we had all the time in the world, all the budget in the world, we would love to sort of have a brand new style every single one, and stuff like that, what I mean? But a lot of times we're just sort of trying to tell the story, I've lost track of what my point was.
Well, it's interesting, like, because even you say about big budget films and films that are released in movie theaters and stuff, but even Disney classics reused animation. There's a scene in The Jungle Book. There's reused in Robin Hood and stuff like that. So a dance scene when they literally use the same animation and just paste different characters over it, so the movement was identical. It made sense to do that.
Yeah. And I hear they do that in movies too, like I mean, sometimes they'll need something and they'll get it from a different movie or something like that, I think I read something about Gladiator, but it's like they were going to execute him, and then he fights the execution, the people that took him out in the forest, and he, like, I think the editor was was talking about this, where it's like he slashes him across the neck with the sword, and you needed basically like something for the blood to go against, like a tree, and then the blood splashes against the tree. And I think he said that he got that from a different movie.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Because it's just, again, like so much of this is, and even storyboarding, I'm realizing that a lot of times just shots are the shots. It's just like, okay, it's a close up on her head, and it's talking, or it's a medium on the head, or it's a wide shot on the head. You know what I mean? And obviously they do that in movies, right? They could have, some directors shoot with multiple camera setups, and they shoot the coverage and then the close-ups and stuff like that, right? And the editing is just, are we going to use the coverage shot? Are we going to use the close-up shot? Or are we going to, And so a lot of it is kind of like even when I'm boarding now, I draw, stuff, and then I just basically later, I'm like, I need a close-up of a head, and I'll go back and I'll look at all the close-ups that I have, and I'm like, okay, I'll just take this one and I'll just grab it and put it over there, and, but that's like editing. I feel like the most important thing is all the shots are supposed to emote something, right? It's like a wide shot feels different. Why are you on a wide versus a close? You know what I mean? They feel different when you're watching them and you're listening to it. And so a lot of it is just sort of kind of going like, I think it should be a close up here, and I think this would play better on the wide. That stuff is interesting to me, and it keeps me, for however long I've been doing this, like 20 years or whatever. Again, going back to the whole, being a young artist and understanding, like, thinking this is the path that I want to go down, but then realizing that that's like, this doesn't really interest me anymore, and then sort of accidentally jumping into something and realizing, oh, this is the thing that keeps me interested. This is what's kept me interested for the last 20 years. I don't know, like as much as I don't know, I'm speaking sort of from the perspective of my father and trying to sort of look to the future and plan where you're going to go, is like, you plan as much as you can, but life is going to take you where it's going to take you, So.
Yeah. Even with my show, I was watching some DC animated movies and your name came up, and then we connected on Twitter, and then you were on my show, and I love when stuff like that happens.
Oh yeah. That's funny. I it's that's another thing too, because I think sometimes I feel like, what we do is so niche in a way, that I'm surprised sometimes when, like people like you, they're like, oh, you actually watched that? Wow. But I didn't realize you had an animation background. That's even more awesome.
I always wanted to do animation. I got a degree in it, and the month I graduated, Disney closed the animation studio I wanted to work at. So, and then I accidentally ended up in the games industry for a while, and then doing film stuff. And in my spare time, I was interviewing people and reviewing films, because I've always loved films and animation my entire life. And ultimately, I wanted to have my own show. So for the last 4 years, I've been doing this.
Yeah.
So I get to, you know, talk about all the stuff I love and animation and films and TV shows and all that good stuff.
Yeah. I think these things are, you know, I mean, hopefully, you know, some people will get something out of this, you know what I mean, with the one that I'm doing. But yeah, I love watching shows where people are interviewing like creatives or something like that, you know, and just, you know, it's like the behind the scenes thing that you're talking about, you know.
To me, it's interesting if you love the shows or the movies that you're talking about, but also if someone is just starting university or they're a kid and they're like, wow, I'd love to do this one day, but I've got no idea. Like, this seems inaccessible to me. And then you see it's real people that work on this stuff and sharing their stories, I think, is immensely valuable to other people.
So you're providing a very important, crucial service.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, and hopefully entertaining people at the same time. So I must ask you, speaking of which, so we mentioned you worked at Sony Animation, but then very interestingly, is that what opened the door to you working for PlayStation? Because you did character designs and stuff like that. Did that job lead into the other one?
Another sort of interesting thing happened around that time because Pixar had this is like the late 90s, right?
Yeah.
I started about, I think, 96, but around, I don't know if it's like 98 or 99, but Pixar sort of hit the scene, right?
They did.
The whole industry basically was saying, again, the union was even touting this, that 2D animation is going to die. And so they were telling everybody that you need to learn 3D if you want to continue having a job, right? I think Disney had like tons of layoffs at the time. I had heard, it sounded like they had laid off like 80% of their animation staff because most, you know, obviously it takes many in-betweeners to make a 2D movie, right? So most of those people got laid off, you know? And so at the time I remember, you know, even, you know, at Sony, which was, you know, this sort of well-funded startup company, you know, we were just thinking like, you know, do we even want to stay in this, you know, because, you know, most of the people that they got were people that were either failed comic book artists or people that wanted to do comics, right? And so our love was to draw, you know? And so even when it went digital, we're like, do we want to do that or not, you know? And so, you know, again, like it seemed like the trend was that, you know, things were going to everything was going to move to 3D and 2D was going to be dead, basically, right? And so I had a friend that worked at PlayStation, and I think they used to be up in San Francisco, and they had just moved down to San Diego. And so my friend's wife, I think, worked with the boss of them, and so she moved down with them, you know, because he wanted her to basically, you know, continue, you know, working. I guess they worked well as a team. And so my friend was just like, hey, you know, they're looking for people, and they want their games to be more cinematic, and so they're looking for people with, you know, sort of cinematic, you know, eyes and things like that. And I was like, I have no experience, you know, I don't know how to do 3D, let alone like building in Maya and all that kind of stuff. And it was just submit your portfolio, you know. And so I just did it on a whim, and so I got an offer, and so I was just thinking, like, if everything's moving into 3D, or maybe animation is not quite yet, because I was getting a little burnt out at Sony, because Sony was, you know, quite honestly, they worked you really hard, you know. It was a little bit of a sweatshop, you know. And so I was just like, you know, I've always wanted to do video games also, you know what I mean? And so I got an offer to eventually become an art director, right? And again, it's interesting because titles and things are very, very different. Like, I think as an art director, it's more technical in video games, right? Because it's a lot more about scheduling. So anyways, I thought it was like, oh, I'm going to be like a lead character designer or something like that, you know? And so I took the job because, again, it just kind of, it was something that I've always wanted to sort of experience. But also just the way the industry was kind of trending. I was thinking, like, I don't even know if I want to do 3D animation, you know?
I was the same. I love the art of 2D animation, and because I was competing at the time with, as you say, 80% of Disney animators, which were suddenly looking for jobs. And I loved the art of 2D animation, and to me 3D animation was more like puppetry, and it wasn't something I wanted to learn or do.
Yeah. Especially back in the day, it was kind of bad, right? Like, I mean, it's awesome now, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that back in the 90s, it was, it was the infancy of it, and so, yeah, it was kind of stiff and kind of clunky, and like sometimes it was over animated in kind of an awkward way, and yeah, I just didn't love it. Obviously Pixar did amazing. That's why they became so popular. But anything below that, like especially the TV stuff.
Oh yeah, and if you look back at that stuff now, it's really dated. Whereas if you look at 2D stuff from the 1980s or 60s, it still looks pretty good.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's why I went to PlayStation. But I think again, it was where I was doing some stuff for comics, but also what I was doing in video games. It made me realize that I really miss storytelling, because I did train up to do some character designs and stuff like that. But in the meantime, in order to learn like Maya, I had to do things like build props, like, can you, or backgrounds, can you, but then you have to, you have to like paint the maps for them. Then you got to like do the specularity on them and stuff like that, and the bump mapping on it and stuff like that, which was really, really technical and tedious. Like, when I would, in animation, I kind of felt like when the weekend would hit, I would feel like exhausted, but I would feel like I did a lot of work and I felt good, but when I was in video games, I just remember going like, why am I building this chair? I've spent like a week or like a couple of days, designing this chair, building a chair, bump mapping the chair, skinning the, whatever, what I mean? Like texture mapping the chair, and it's a chair, you know what I mean? Like, especially this is like during PS2 time, right? So the technology was not advanced at all, you know what I mean? Even doing characters, like it was, they're so low poly, especially if they had to animate stuff like that it was very like limiting in a way, and so I that's why I went back into animation, because I think that that period of time, it really sort of made me realize, I love this as a kid, but I don't think I like working in it, if that makes sense. Even though comics was still like it's closer because it's just drawing, but I'm like, oh, there's this tedious aspect of it that, you know what I mean? Like I couldn't. I remember doing this cover, and I had an open deadline on it. They gave it to me way early, right? And I was still late on it, even though they gave me like a 6-month deadline, because again, it would be a thing. I'd go to work and I'd come home and I'd turn on my TV and be like, okay, I'm gonna sit at this table and do this, right? And the first week, when I was trying to figure out the composition, it had a lot of characters in it, and just putting it down, it was fun and exciting and all that kind of stuff. But once I had to like transfer it up into the larger size on the paper, and I'm sitting here tracing it, and because there's like 10 characters on it, there's like so many lines, and again, it was painful. I'm just like, I don't think this is the job for me anymore. I think I've lost my love for this aspect of it.
Sometimes you just need to do stuff like that just to find out what you do love, and I think it's okay to try something and then go, that's not for me, rather than just spend your whole life wondering about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you definitely have to. I mean, I talk about this even in animation when I'm talking to people, because it's like with creatives, right? It's like there's people that you talk about things, but you've only talked about it, so it's theory.
Yeah.
And you don't really know until you actually do it. Do you know what I mean? So in the beginning, I used to, as you can tell, like, when I get on certain things, I can talk forever, and I have a tendency to ramble about it. And so a lot of times, when you're talking to people that are supposed to be story people, right? And you're talking about movies, and that's always fun, right? And you always, you get to be critical. Like, yeah, I don't know why they did that. Or like, oh, I love how they did that. And you notice that nuance and stuff like that, right? But then when it's time to actually do the work, sometimes I'm just like, wow, you're showing me nothing of what you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, why did you shoot this shot like this? Why did you stack those people like that? You know what I mean? I mean, they're so stiff. It's like, where's the subtext, that we talk about when we talk about film, of like how great that shot was because subtextually this is happening or something like that. Or like, choices that you make, of like, why did they shoot it on the back of his head or something like that? Or how did they transition from this to that kind of thing? But then, when I'm working with people and you can spend hours talking about it, especially when you're talking about work, right? You're like, okay, here's the script. Okay, this is the scene that you're going to do. whatever, and we're talking about like film and, it should feel like this, and, and here, this is, this transition should feel, very emotional versus just a cold, dry transition, and how do you do that? What are ways that you do that, and you talk about movies and you get, down these rabbit holes of talking about like other things. And then, the work comes back and you're just like, wow, that's the driest transition. That's so, bleh, and so I'm realizing, I think a lot of people feel like they're contributing or creating if they talk about it, and
Right.
I think like, when we talked about earlier, like a lot of people kind of feel like, oh, I have some ownership now because I've expressed it to people and we've had a dialogue about it, and words were exchanged or thoughts were exchanged, that I'm part of this thing now, and so I think, I have a tendency to try to talk about theory less now. We'll talk about it, hopefully, I try to restrain myself and cut it off at a certain point and just go like, okay, now do it, now show it to me. It's really where the proof is, right?
Yeah, because even the smallest movement, or the way the camera's framed, or the music or the lack of music, and how the person reacts, and the voiceover and all that stuff, you can create an incredible scene out of the smallest, tiniest, most tender moment, or it can just be nothing. It can just be like dead air, and it really does make a difference.
Yeah, and and obviously things like that happen, in editing too, because there's sometimes when you board something, you just think like, okay, it's going to lead up to this, in this moment, you're going to hold on that person's look, and you're going to hold on it, and that person's look is going to slowly change into something. But if you edit it where, okay, that, you get up to the close-up or whatever, then like, a second later, you're off of it, that's a speed bump now. You're like, the moment is gone. There's no moment now. You're supposed to be holding on that for like 10 seconds, but it's only on there for like 1 second, so, obviously you can't do that with all of it, but there are moments where that is, I think, essential to basically, to understand that that's an important moment for this character. In order to hold it for 10 seconds, we need to have that shot, and we need to have the animation for that, and so because a lot of times, believe me, so many times, when the animation comes back, it's kind of like, oh, this moment that we're supposed to be, whatever, that drawing is so bad, that's so horrible. So a lot of times we'll try to find something that actually has that right expression, and we'll kind of build up to that, and we'll hold on it, and then hopefully there's a couple of frames that we can sort of either do something with, and then the rest of it will just cut out. So it's really amazing. It's really, the funny part that always happens is like, sometimes there's like, okay, this animation thing, they'll start on the stairs and they go down the stairs, and they do this weird run or something, and then they'll do something like that, and the animation of the run is so horrible or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes we'll just think like, okay, what if we just take the ugly part and just cut it out? Let's just look at it. Let's just see what happens. And sometimes it just totally works. It just looks like he ran there faster, and we're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that worked. It's so bizarre. Sometimes, again, it'll be a thing where somebody is here, and then they move up to camera, and we're like, oh, let's just cut the middle part of the movie. Let's just see if that works or not. We're just like, oh my gosh, that almost works. Can we just take one frame of them moving for an in between, and then it totally works. So
because your mind fills in the blanks anyway, right? So as an audience, if someone starting to walk down the stairs, then they're at the bottom of the stairs, they understand what's happened anyway. Yeah,
and like animation, especially 2D, is a little forgiving sometimes. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it's just animated that way. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So in 2006, I believe, you won a Daytime Emmy for the series of Batman. Is that kind of around the time that you cemented in your mind that you wanted to stay with superheroes, because you'd had such success with that show?
One of the things also that I, when I got into animation, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, because I've always been drawn to the more dramatic stuff, right? Like, in the 90s, I loved like Hong Kong cinema, and I loved Japanese anime, and a lot of kind of, American animation is considered, it's kid stuff, right? It's like a majority of it is, for preschoolers or, any like young kids, Pixar obviously was able to sort of marry the two, right? Like, adults will enjoy it, kids will enjoy it, and so I never I never really wanted to work on like Scooby-Doo or something like that, or Clifford the Red Dog or something, or Strawberry Shortcake or something like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of not my thing or my interest, you know.
Mm.
But when I was at Sony, again, we were doing like action adventure things. You know what I mean? Like, you know, again, Starship Troopers, you know, Extreme Ghostbusters, Godzilla, and things like that. You know, and sure, it's a little kiddified, but they're action things, right? So that made me even more like, oh, I think I can, you know, exist in this industry. You know, and I've been lucky enough to sort of do mostly, you know, again, superhero type of stuff. It's just because I don't think I'm that good at comedy, you know. And so, you know, around that time of, you know, when we were working on the Batman, because the Batman was the thing that sort of got me out of video games, right? Like sort of towards the tail end of video games, I was doing some freelance work, you know, for like the Teen Titans series, you know, like Glenn Morikami did. Because, you know, I still had friends in the industry, obviously, right? And so a friend from, like when I was at Sony, actually, I got a few of my friends from comics to go into animation. You know, like Chap Yep, who was, you know, Chap Yep and Jeff Matsuno were sort of the two studio artists, you know, the higher profile studio artists for Rob Liefeld, right? And I became really good friends with both of them because they're just super nice guys, right? And talented. And so Chap got into like, you know, storyboarding and designing and stuff like that. But I think Jeff just became a designer. He designed like the Jackie Chan animation thing for Sony. And so, you know, we still hung out. Like when I would drive back to LA from San Diego when I was working at PlayStation, you know, I think a few times I hung out with Jeff and I stayed over at his house and stuff like that. And he was telling me that, oh, he was developing this Batman thing, you know, at Warner Brothers. And so he was just like, do you want to direct on it? You know? And so, so that's how I kind of got back, you know, into. So I came back, you know, I moved out. I was just like, okay, I'm kind of done with video games, and I moved out to LA for the Batman, and so that in itself was another sort of there's sort of political things that happens behind the scenes. You know, we didn't think it was going to be quite the way it was. We thought it was going to be a little more like Batman the Animated Series, but I think that they really wanted something that's a little bit more funner, you know. And so there was a really big. That was a very, very difficult series because I think all the artists wanted to do, you know, because we were all fans of Batman the Animated Series and the Bruce Timm stuff, you know, and we thought we were going to actually get a chance to actually do that, but in a more modern kind of style. But story-wise, it was the furthest thing from that, you know. I think it eventually sort of became that as the seasons kind of went along. I don't know, but a lot of good things happened too because I think it bonded like a lot of the artists, like especially my team. My team they're so good, you know. One of them now is a art director at Riot Games, you know, for the League of Legends, you know. And he's just a super talented artist. His name is Eric Canetti, and he's like an artist in comics, you know. And another person that was one of my board artists was John Fang, who is he's like an executive producer now at like Cartoon Network. He's working on Ben 10 and things like that. And our humble beginnings, again, we were this team that was working on this really difficult show that was. The identity of it was, you know what I mean, like schizophrenic a little bit, you know. But we built like this really, really tight bond, you know. And so there's a lot of things that I remember about it very, very fondly, you know. But there's a lot of things about it too that were very, very painful. I don't know. Again, like these awards things are it's so political and random sometimes. You know, I don't think we ever thought that we would win something for it. So. I remember the first year we were, you know, for season 1, we were nominated, right? And I was so excited. I invited my sister and my brother-in-law. We went, and then we didn't win and stuff like that, you know. But then the second one, I was just like, you know, it's not quite the Emmys because there's the really like glitzy Emmys, and then there's the sort of daytime Emmys, you know, in production stuff, which was, you know, fancy, but it's not that kind of what you see on TV. Yeah. And so the second year, I was just like, I don't need to go because, you know, I'm introverted also anyways. But we actually ended up winning, you know, so.
So did you continue being a freelancer for a while? Because between 2009 and 2011, I believe, and this just could be based on when the movies were released, but you worked between Marvel and DC. So did you work on like a bunch of Marvel projects and a bunch of DC ones, or were you kind of going between studios and different productions?
So around, like, after the Batman happened, right? I think there was a big shift, I think, in programming. You know, I think like a lot of the Saturday morning cartoons stopped playing cartoons, and they were playing more like sports and things like that. Like Kids WB in LA was like a big Saturday morning thing, and I think they basically said that we're not doing the Kids WB anymore. You know, so even the studio, we used to be in Sherman Oaks, and we had like a big 3-story, modern building. And I think towards the end of it, the whole second floor there was nobody on the second floor. I think on the first floor, there was like 2 productions right there, and like this one half of the first floor, and up on the third floor when I was working on some development, we were in this corner, and the rest of it was just barren. And so I think at that time, a lot of people were thinking like, is WB going to stop doing animation? And so I had a friend that was at Marvel, and he was like, oh, they're doing like direct videos at Marvel. Like, do you want to come work on these?
Yeah.
And at the time, I think because the Batman burnt me out so bad, like my team, they just sort of left because they're just like, we can't do this anymore. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with no team. I have to build a whole new team. And again, this is, very difficult. So I was just like, I didn't want to direct anymore for a while. I just want to like take care of my own things. I don't want to manage a team. I don't want to have to deal with all this politics. Just give me assignments and let me just create. So I went to Marvel as a storyboard artist for a little while. Then I got, like the first. So Marvel had done a deal with Lionsgate. So we were just in this small space in the beginning, right? I think it was an 8-movie deal, right, or an 8 DTV deal. And so I helped work on the first. I came in sort of on the third one, but they only did 4, and then they had a little bit of a hiatus, right? So what happened was I left WB. I went there for about almost a year, and it helped them, work on the first 4, even though I worked on like 2 of them. And then they wanted to take a break because they wanted to see how they sold, because it was kind of an experiment for them, right?
Yeah.
So during that 1-year time, I went back to WB to storyboard. But then they picked up again, and then I went back to Marvel, and then they, made me a director. And so that's kind of how it was. It kind of wasn't like I was at both places and sort of, what I mean?
Yeah,
it was,
of course, yeah.
So it's just how they were, released. Because like that Thor, Son of Asgard thing, it got released really late because, and actually we did that one before Planet Hulk,
Right.
and but I think the Thor movie had come out or something like that. Or they were going to wait for the Thor movie to come out. So they held on to it. You know what I mean? And they didn't release it for like almost 2 years or 3 years or something like that. Yeah. And then they released it, and I was at WB at the time. And I remember having to go back and do a commentary track on it. And I was just like, that was like 3 or 4 years ago. Or I can't even remember like when we were,
You worked on Planet Hulk. Part of this storyline was used in Thor Ragnarok, the movie. I'm just curious, have you seen it, and what did you think of it?
Thor Ragnarok?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I thought it was fun, I mean, it's, but I think they do that in movies a lot, you know what I mean? Like, in the Batman movies too, they reference year 1 a lot. I think year 1's been to death, and
apparently the new movie is going to be year 2.
Oh, year 2. Yeah, but I mean, like a lot of things from the comics, you know what I mean? Like they use in movies, and obviously it's like the trick is how they're going to introduce it, and then sort of, how much of it they're going to use, that kind of stuff, So yes, there's certain things that were, obviously I think based off of the whole Planet Hulk thing, but it's entirely it's just scenes, you know what I mean? It's,
yeah, definitely.
It's very different, so. Yeah.
And I'm curious to say, who decides which movies are coming out? Does Warner Brothers just set the schedule, or can creative people such as yourself pitch a movie idea based on a graphic novel or an original idea if you have one?
Oh yeah, it's oh shoot, this reminds me of the James Tucker thing that I never finished because my brain like gets lost sometimes. And maybe I'll get to that later if I can remember it. But most of the time it's DC, right? There's these representatives from DC, right? Which is Mike Carlin, who as a kid, I remember seeing his name, so I geeked out when I first met him. Another person named Ames, They're the two people from DC, that we sort of meet with like on a weekly, bi-weekly kind of, or bi-monthly, that's every 2 weeks. And then there's the home video people, right? Who actually, the home video, WB home video is the ones that basically pay for what we do.
Right.
But a lot of the times creatively, there's the WB head, animation heads, there's us as producers,
yep.
And there's DC. And so a lot of times, they'll have, Warner Brothers will, the heads, which I'm not in these, initial meetings, they're just kind of say like, oh, we've done some talking with, home video or whatever like that. They're interested in this, and, DC, and then DC is kind of going like, well, we want this. So a lot of times it's the bigger heads that are sort of making these sort of general kind of things, but then it's us to kind of say like, I don't know if I could do that, or like, I'm not really interested in that, or like, okay, let's maybe this or something like that, right? But sometimes again, they don't have anything, and then again, the bigger producers like the Bruce Timms and stuff like that, or James, they'll be like, hey, I have this idea, of things. Like I'm working on one now, which was something that I had read, and I was just like, oh, I'd be kind of interested in doing that, and but again, like I had a meeting with the WB heads, and they're just kind of going like, well, we're thinking this. And it's like, I don't know, do you have anything that you're maybe thinking about? I was just like, well, what about this? Maybe this, and there's like, okay, we'll shoot that over to home video, and DC, and just kind of see like, what do they think? I mean, so a lot of times it's this, it's just like a lot of people sort of throwing out their ideas or that sort of either suits their interests or maybe even a little bit of an agenda kind of a thing, which, because I think home video is just more about like, what do you think it's going to sell?
Yeah.
DC is kind of like what's popular now, and well, what are they, what's kind of interested in. Warner Brothers is kind of the same thing, what they think is, but then there's other sort of needs that I think, I don't know if this happened to me, but I remember when DC Entertainment was formed. There was this sort of a meet and greet thing with the studio, and they had a chart with a pyramid as far as like tiers of characters that they wanted to start promoting, kind of a thing, And then again, that was like 10 years ago, so I don't know if that still exists, But I think in their mind, there's the ones that sell, that make them money, and so I think they default to those, like obviously Batman, which a lot of people talk about and complain about, because that's pretty much guaranteed that they're going to make some money off of that. There'll be some interest in that. Do you know what I mean? And so they're, on a business level, I think they're reluctant to sort of, take a chance on no-name things because, of interest in marketing and stuff like that, So I don't know. The business side of it is very interesting. You know what I mean? Because you'll have like Disney or Marvel that'll take a chance on something like Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, even when we were in, working on the animation stuff for Marvel, right? I think they were already trying to do that because I think they used the animation, the stuff that we were doing, to sell stuff. Like, because we worked on a Doctor Strange thing, right?
Yeah.
And they used that to sell Doctor Strange, actually, as a movie. Like when we were working on the Iron Man one, Jon Favreau actually was asking for us to send our material to them, like, when we had done the, when we finished the movie and it was all kind of done, and we had a screening, I think at Paramount or something like that, we rented it. I think they rented a screening room and stuff like that, and we watched it. I think Jon Favreau actually went. But he was kind of, so he says anyways, I don't know if it was just to be nice to us, but he was saying like he actually had a laptop and he played the movie and stuff like that, while he was shooting or something like that, just to kind of get a sense of things, or feel of things. And so, again, like, this happens a lot, so I'm not saying it's like, some kind of weird, who's stealing from who kind of a thing. But the Mark I armor is very similar to the one that the producer on, the animated Iron Man, Frank Parr, drew, So it's one that we used, whatever, is very similar to the one that's in the movie, So I think, again, and this is kind of common. They do that in comics also. They do things to sell IPs, and so Marvel, obviously, I think their story is so compelling is because they aggressively, and they made it basically, making Iron Man, again, things like Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember when we were in our second group of movies, like Rocket Raccoon kept coming up, and I was just like, why Rocket Raccoon? And it keeps coming up. Like, well, do we do a Thor story? Do we do a X-Men story? Well, we can't do an X-Men because Fox owned it at the time. Yeah. But it was like, what about Rocket Raccoon? And we're like, why do you keep bringing up Rocket Raccoon? Like, who knows anything about Rocket Raccoon? But they were setting up the Guardians of the Galaxy thing, I guess.
Yeah.
So they had a plan, definitely, and they took the risks. Where a lot of big studios, I think that they don't think that far ahead.
I think it really does pay off too.
Yeah. But it's a gamble, and I understand it because it's, once you've committed to something, if it flops, that could kill your studio. If you're slate for that year, you don't have one big blockbuster or you don't have a big moneymaker, that could tank your studio, So, I mean, I get it, but it's a little disheartening sometimes creatively,
So in 2016, there was a revival of the 1960s Batman TV series, Return of the Caped Crusaders. My question to you is this. If you could revive any classic TV show, what would it be and who would you cast in it?
I hate those questions. I'm sorry. Wow. I've always said, and this is like an old anime, I don't even know what story it would be, but I just remember it had such a big effect on me, like the old Battle of the Planets or the Gotcha Man, I don't know even what story, what angle I would take with that, because they're this sort of this team, this, what they call the science ninja team. And, they fight this, I don't know, even premise-wise, again, it's sort of 80s in a way, you know what I mean? But that's like the default one that I always say. But yeah, I'm sorry, that's not very interesting. I don't know. It's not very cool.
I look forward to it happening. Now, I love movies such as The Killing Joke and Batman Hush, which are, of course, based on famous graphic novels. When stories are as beloved as they are, how much pressure do you feel to remain faithful to it, but also be conscious of the fact that you want to surprise people and perhaps take the story in new directions too?
Yeah, I think I didn't work on Hush.
Can you do storyboards on that?
Oh, I did some storyboards on it. Yeah. So I didn't have any. You're right.
Yeah, I know.
And so, when you do storyboards, you're sort of like, okay, that's just the assignment,
Yeah.
And somebody else is the director, so I'm not trying to mess up their flow, and so I'm just following.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah.
But I remember when Hush came up, I was just like, wow, this is going to be a tough. It's going to there's going to be fans of Joker, there's going to be fans of all these characters and stuff like that, and so I was just like, wow, this one might be kind of tough because you're going to have to make all of those fights really good, or all these sort of things really good, And it's weird too because Killing Joke. Well, I'm sorry, I'm jumping again, but Killing Joke was the first one that really kind of, my first sort of taste of the internet hate, right? And so it kind of messed with me a little bit. I think it made me sort of question things a little more because I think in the past, like you'd do things and everybody would be, like, oh, that's so great, you know what I mean? But that one, I think it was complicated and it was kind of weird, because the story itself I thought was very difficult, because again, like even the whole point of it is, they tell this joke at the end and then like, did he kill him or not? It's not like, they're battling to save the planet or somebody's life or something like that. It's these two people with this history and this grudge, and even just the way it ends, it's more introspective, I suppose. You know what I mean? It's not like the classic summer blockbuster explosions and then the good guy wins and whatever, and so, and it's, the world is a lot darker, and I think it's definitely psychological. And so, maybe part of it was because the mix wasn't, I think we attacked it as if it was like a dark psychological thing, but I think a lot of people went into it thinking it's going to be like Batman animated series or some sort of family sort of Batman thing, you know what I mean? And so there's a lot of things that I thought was very subtle, and that I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off my own thing and not really the question, but I think that there's things that you sort of, that one made me question, because there's things where I was just like, when I first read it, I was just like, because again, I wasn't part of the writing thing because I wasn't a producer at the time. And I was like, I wonder why they went this way. And I'm like, okay, I get it. It's like Batgirl's story is supposed to mimic, it's this whole thing of one bad day, right? It's like her one bad day, which basically that, the thing we start on is the moment of her bad day, right? She meets this psychopath guy that's obsessed with her, right? And Batman talks about this whole abyss, following down the abyss, and you're too close to the abyss, and it's going to make you do bad things, right? And so we honored that, which to me, it led to, this is very sort of, in my mind anyways, kind of like a No Country for Old Men type of, it's not like, it's kind of impressionistic and stuff like that, you know? And so that's what we're kind of trying to make. And there's things too, which I understand why I think that now, but it wasn't supposed to be like that. You know, I mean, like the whole relationship between Batman and Batgirl, it was supposed to be a mistake. It wasn't supposed to be that, oh, you know, she's been in love with him this whole time and stuff like that. And I get it, because when she's talking to the librarian's she has a secret that she has to keep. And so this was supposed to be sort of code speak for her. But I think a lot of people, because she says, you know, oh, I have this yoga instructor, I think people took that as, oh yeah, she's in love with him. But it was like, no, she's just working at night and they're fighting crime, but he's talking about relationships. So she's kind of dancing around it and sort of making videos. So it's kind of about a relationship. And they're like, oh, she was talking about the relationship. And then they made out, and then like, oh, that's not how we intended it. So it really made me realize that, you know, sometimes when you're trying to thread these needles, like you may have lost the audience at some point. Do you know what I mean? And so I think Killing Joke, through a certain period, I think it made us really gun shy about certain things. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I'm thinking in the beginning, we didn't really think of it as much pressure. I remember working on year one, even Planet Hulk, you know, from Marvel, and it's a different thing, Public Enemies, you know. I think that, you know, we were just kind of doing it and just kind of going like, this is what we feel about it. And, you know, just like, you know, fans with, you know, this is my impression of it, and this is what I liked about it, and this is what I didn't like about it. I'm going to do the stuff I like and not do the stuff I don't like, you know. But I think after Killing Joke, it sort of made us a lot more kind of like, wow, some people are very, very vocal about things. You know what I mean? And, you know, I've had threats of my life, threats of like, you know, never hiring me again. And, you know, like I'm the worst director ever kind of. Actually, I got that on All-Star Superman too. But,
really?
Yeah. I mean, it's online, you know, there's people that, but All-Star Superman, I think, like, you know, there was a few, because they just, you know what I mean? There's just some people, even with Red Sun, there's just some people that love the source material so much, you know? And sometimes, I don't know, reading it, I'm kind of going like, I don't know, the source material to me, it doesn't tie together as neatly. And we try to do things to make it so it's a nice, cohesive, plot-driven story. But some people are not going to agree with the change that we do. Yeah, there's pressure. There's more pressure now, I think, than when I was younger, and I was just kind of. But I think there's certain stories that are safer. You know what I mean? And there's certain stories. You know what I mean? It's understanding. But even like in All-Star Superman, there's certain things that I liked. Like, you know, I knew that the Suicide Girl thing. Like, I was trying to get that in there, but you know, some of the people ahead, you know, above me, they're just like, no. I'm like, I think it's a mistake. I think it's really important that we put the scene in there, you know? So, you know, it's not just me or one person that sort of makes the decision sometimes. So it's.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps people forget that it's a massive organization, and there's sometimes people pulling in different directions, creative decisions and business decisions and stuff like that. And you have to balance all of that as best you can to make the best product that you can. And sometimes you have to make some sacrifices in order to actually finish the film, you know, and it may not be exactly as you envisioned it, but you steered it in as best of the right direction that you could. Yeah.
It's like Red Sun, you know, and this one was a production thing, right? It's like the end of Red Sun. You read that, right? Red Sun.
Yeah.
You know how at the end it sort of projects into the future and it time jumps all these things, right? Part of the reason we didn't do that was because it's a production nightmare. You know what I mean? Because like just going around the world and all this with the budget that we have, like I remember we had a production meeting where they're just like, you guys have too many environments now. You know, you have to cut down your environments by like at least a third, you know? And so but so the end, we're just like, what, we're going to design this one shot of this one background and paint and commit somebody to design it, commit somebody to paint it, for this one shot, just so we can say like, and then we move to the 21st century or 22nd, whatever, and then jump to the next century and then the next century. So that's like, a handful of, these designs that need to be designed, painted, just for like 2 seconds of animation per, and we're like, already we're overextended it. Like we can only get parts of, Moscow, or we can only get parts of, this ice mountain or something like that, so yeah, there's a lot of, the audience, of course they're not going to know because they're just watching something. They just want to enjoy it. But there's just a lot of factors that kind of go on behind the scenes also that influence, and I say that with the movies too, as much as obviously, it's very easy for people to sort of, bash on the DC movies. I'm sure there's a lot of politics that happened, that's why it is the way it is,
How easy is it to, say you want a particular cameo of a character in one of your films, DC and Warner Brothers fairly open and accessible to, if you want a Superman cameo in a Batman production or Suicide Squad or whoever it happens to be, do you have quite free access to the library of roster of characters?
That becomes a thing also, which, one of Bruce Timm's, tenements, is the whole less is more thing sometimes, because there are things even when we're doing, I remember like Gods and Monsters even, because it's an Elseworlds thing, we wanted to, I remember wanting to put like Mom and Pa Kent, at the crash site of when the Superman thing comes, just a farmer, they get turned away by the police basically. But Bruce didn't want to do that because he was just like, sometimes there's too much, like it's, and that's just Bruce, which is good or bad, because I think, yes, in one sense, if you're safer about it, you don't distract the audience and stuff like that, but part of me also likes those little Easter eggs, and so I think if sometimes we'll sneak them into the background, but they can't have speaking parts because that becomes another, again, budgetary kind of thing. It's like now we have to have another actor to actually do that voice kind of a thing, and we run into those limitations as well because of the, their union, the actors union, and the SAG. I think it's SAG. They're work-wise, they're only allowed a certain amount of voice, characters they can do, and so we have to. How many characters do we have? How many actors do we need to get to cover all this stuff? So
I remember when the death of Superman came out originally, the comic books, and it was in the news, and this is before there were hundreds of channels or anything like that. It was in the mainstream evening news in the UK. Superman had died. Can you envision anything else happening of that scale that would sort of make sort of mainstream news again like that?
Wow. I think comic book wise, no, except for I might equate this has to do with more of the comic book business than it does with the, an event of a character. But I think when Image Comics blew up, and starting to see some of them in like Robin commercials and other people in commercials, I think that was the only other time that something, comic book related, specifically, not like a comic book movie or anything like that, because obviously, but just about comics or the industry of comics or its creators. I think that was, I think the Death of Superman one is probably the biggest that I can recall anyways. I think you're right.
Yeah, I was trying to imagine anything else, unless I guess Bruce Wayne's parents, it turns out they faked their death this whole time and they just, that'd be terrible. Anyway. Imagine if that story's been told 1 billion times and it turns out in all of them they were faking it.
Yeah.
But I just say, I love, can you imagine that? Has that happened?
Well, I mean, there's just a lot of like retconning that happens, retro kind of, and so I don't know, comics are funny that way, and I think that's part of the fandom also, and why the fans are the way they are sometimes, you know what I mean? Because, I think like music, like video games even, it's like, maybe anything that you love, it's like, it's when it was introduced to the first time, that is what you're going to remember as being the pinnacle. That's the top of the hill kind of a thing. You know what I mean? And anything else is never going to resonate with you like it did, when you were introduced to it, right? So I don't know. Maybe some people got introduced to Spider-Man when he was a clone, and then that's the best. I don't know, but comics, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens in comics. So
yeah, just a bit, yeah.
yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me, if somebody could tell a good story of that Bruce's parents never died, then
yeah. And they put the bats there on purpose.
Yeah.
So I love the Elseworlds stories that have been coming out, Gotham by Gaslight. The thing I love about that too is the fact that you can literally take any character and just slightly change their backstory and it would create an entirely different future. Is there a DC character that you perhaps haven't worked on yet that you'd love to reinvent them?
I have to be honest that I really wasn't a DC collector when I was reading comics. Yeah, I like the darker, angsty, sort of psychological stuff, and so I kind of feel like a lot of, outside of obviously the graphic novels, the stuff that like Frank Miller, Morrison, or Garth Ennis, those people writing. I think most of it was kind of, I don't know. I just couldn't get into them. They're a little bit jokey and a little bit sort of, I don't know. It didn't speak to me. They didn't speak to me. You know what I mean? And so I'm not as familiar with, and even looking at some of the DC encyclopedias of characters, there's some really weird characters in it. You know what I mean? Like, really bizarre. So I don't know. I like the modern version of DC. You know what I mean? Like the Silver Age, stuff kind of didn't really connect with me.
I guess if you were going to pick a completely random character, it'd be interesting just to explore their actual story the first time round before you reinvented them, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Because the DC stuff that I did read was more of the Vertigo line stuff. I think I definitely collected those. So like working on Death was an absolute dream of mine. That's kind of corny dream, but I think I got into the industry again, not being like a huge, animation, fan. It was a means to an end for me, and if I was going to do something, I've always wanted to do something that was more like a Hong Kong cinema or an anime or like a dark sort of drama kind of a thing, and like, I remember when I was even trying to get into comics, like I try to draw like Sandman stuff, and so I remember getting into animation, and my default, when I would get questions of like, what DC character would you want to work on, it would always be Sandman, and so to be able, but I never thought it would really happen because again, it's not fighting. There's no capes. There's no tights. There's no, people punching people or, heat vision or, it's very internal. It's mythology based, you know what I mean? And it's about sort of, philosophical, debates or dilemmas or psychological things, you know what I mean? And so, when, for these shorts, when Death was on the table, James Tucker actually was the one that was kind of like, hey, there's this, they're throwing around like Death is something that they would be throwing around as far as like doing one of these shorts, and I was like, oh, I totally want to. She's like, okay, I'll bring that up and that you'd be interested in doing it. So, it's so funny, these things too, because it's like, I think Sandman and like the Death, they've been floating around for a while. Yeah. But I don't think anybody wanted to do them, because, it's a time and a place that the timing thing is really weird because like James, he says that he loves those books, but he doesn't want to tell stories about them, and Bruce is not really that kind of guy at all, and so I remember when it first happened, I was just like, wow, this is so crazy, like how just timing works because, I love that is my thing. Like I love Sandman,
Yeah.
and if I wasn't here at this moment for this opportunity, whatever, this would have gotten passed,
Yeah.
And so, again, it has less to do with me, but just somebody that was interested in enough to, and sometimes stuff like that happens. It's just, because, things like, Hush, I mean, that's been on the table. And even like Red Sun has been on the table, for a long time. Killing Joke's been on the table. Like Juice Contract's been on the table for like almost decades, but it's just nobody either was like, there's not enough, I don't know what to do with it. Or like, I don't think that I can make something out of this, there's stories I think that fans love, but it's because I think they're comic book fans and all the stuff around them. I remember when I was at Marvel, we were thinking about what to do because there's this thing that got canceled because of legal things. And we were thinking about what to do. And I remember the whole Better Ray Bill Thor arc came up, and that was right in the prime of when I was collecting comics. And I remember that those 4 issues blew my mind, But when we were like, oh, let's do that, and immediately I was just like, oh my gosh, let's do that, But then when I was reading it, I was just like, this is not really a good Thor story. It's based, you got to understand, first of all, this hammer is like Excalibur. You have to be worthy to pick it up, because if you got to set that up somehow, you know what I mean? And then it's just like for Thor, it's like he gets beat the whole entire time. He doesn't win, and he's complaining about how he's not worthy and stuff like that. And then, Better Ray Bill is the hero in this. This is not really a good story for Thor, But as a fan or whatever, you like it sort of as a chapter, I think, in Thor,
Right.
So I think things like that happen a lot because there's people that love, whatever it is, Jewish Contract, Hush, or whatever like that. And maybe it works, as a comic book event, which works in chapters.
Mm.
But as a streamlined movie, sometimes I don't think it works in that medium as well, like Apocalypse, the Superman, Batman Apocalypse thing that Lauren Montgomery did. There's a whole, like, you can end a book with a portal opens and, not one Doomsday, but like 20 Doomsday show up, and then as a fan, you end on that and you're just like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Like, that's Doomsday, but there's 20 of them. How is then you gotta wait a month before you realize, oh, they're just clones and stuff like that. But in a linear story, it's just like the portal opens and there's 20 Doomsdays, and you're just like, oh my gosh. But then really quickly you just realize, oh, they're just clones. And so, you know what I mean? You can't rely on that thing where you're expecting people to be waiting and anticipating for a month of like, what does that mean? And what's gonna, like, in 5 seconds it's gonna be resolved. So you're like, why even build that then if it's just going to get resolved in like 5 seconds?
Yeah, I think some things definitely work better in different mediums, and they don't. The thing is too with comic books, you've got, as you say, everything that's happened before and everything that happens after it, whereas if you're trying to just take that small slice of a story but still capture all the emotion that led up to it, but someone might watch this movie and they've never seen a DC animated film or anything, they don't know who anyone is, so you kind of have to introduce the characters a little bit and all that kind of stuff. So it's tough.
Right. Because it's all about context, right? It's like, if you don't have context, then why are you going to feel anything about that character?
So how has the animation industry been affected by coronavirus? I imagine a lot of people can still work from home and continue, so hopefully production schedules haven't been thrown off too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a little bit of an experiment, I mean, there's certain things that are a little bit more difficult. I think especially, I think on the producing and directing kind of side, because even like editing and things like that, but recording voices, I think is there's a lot of things that sort of worked out that you didn't think would work out, because like voice actors, because before you'd have to go into a studio and record, but now it seems to be working that they can do things remotely,
Yeah.
But it's still, there's technical issues sometimes. And so there's things that still gum it up a little bit. So it's not ideal, but it works, I guess, okay. And it takes longer,
Sure.
because you can't get a group of people anymore. You have to do one by one. So just by the nature of that, it costs more and takes more time, but there's a lot of things that, I think it's proven that there's a lot of aspects of it that can be done remotely. Like you don't have to be in a studio. So I'm really curious. I mean, not just about animation, but just how this almost like this test, you know, I mean, or this experiment, you know, is going to affect industries, you know, once it's over. But I think for animation, it's been, I think, good. And, you know, at least at Warner Brothers, you know, I think there was a, you know, this sort of get together from the president that, you know, a little bit of it's kind of rah-rah, but he was saying, like, you know, we've shipped everything, like all the stuff that there's no slowdown at all. And if anything, it's just because everybody's at home, they're watching our stuff more, you know? So I think animation is great that way, you know?
It's a slightly unrelated question. Tell me a fun fact about you, something that people may not know. It could be a party trick, a hobby, anything like that. Trivia.
I'm sorry. I'm boring, and man, I have a very simple life. I think, you know, I think I work a lot, and my life is. I don't know, it's going to turn into a sad sob story, pathetic story. Yeah, I just work a lot. You know what I mean? Yeah. And yeah, so I try to keep things kind of simple in my life. You know, it's well, I don't know. I would these things don't actually connect, but I think like a lot of people think my life is different than it is. You know, my life, I'm a pretty sort of, you know, my work is definitely not 9 to 5. It's way more than 9 to 5. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times they think, like, you know, like actors, or if you work in a movie, it's like you work on something and then you have downtime. Like we punch the clock all the time, and there's times where we're overlapped because some of the stuff that we do isn't consistent. Yeah. So we have to have the day that the job that does the work every day, and then the other stuff just gets added to it. So yeah, it's kind of like one of the weird misconceptions. Like, just, you know, sometimes people think that, oh, I can just go into a studio and do an interview or something like that. You know, back in the day, I'm like, I can't drive to, you know, an hour in the middle of the day to go do an interview and then drive an hour back because I got work to do. I have to go into an office, you know. So that's not fun at all, is it?
Well, I suppose if you look at it while you're doing it, it may not seem like that, but if you think about the actual stuff you're doing, and you're creating these amazing movies, and it's not just, I've always had a thing where I don't want to be complacent in something I'm doing. So if I become good at something, great, but how can I not make it more difficult, but how can I learn a new thing to make the next thing I do better, and, you know, stuff like that. And as you're saying, when you get the animation through, or whatever it is, you have to craft this movie out of the ingredients that you have, and the time and the people available and stuff. So yeah. You know, it can, I think when you're sort of passionate about stuff, that is kind of the main thing you do, and I think that's great in itself.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, again, I think the job is, you know, it's very sort of, you know, consuming in a way, you know, because again, yeah, it's like there are times where it's ultimately satisfying. It's really satisfying, you know, like when people, you have something out and people are like talking about it, and people, especially when they love it, you know, there's nothing more fulfilling than that. You know, it's kind of like, whoa, we made the right decisions, and like people are actually seeing this, and people, you know, they're experiencing the stuff that we were hoping that they would experience, type of thing, you know. But again, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't, you know, again, it's not a job that you just shut it off and you go home. You know, like there's a lot of planning and stressing and worrying, you know what I mean? And that you take home. I mean, that's, you know, another friend of mine, we were just talking about how, like, sometimes you can be in the shower and you're just thinking about stuff, you know what I mean? Just, you know, like, how am I going to solve this or something, you know? You know, I mean, I mean, it would be awesome if, you know, we were more like movies where you could take breaks, you know, after sort of, you know, going through this, you know, regiment. But again, in TV, it's just, you just live in this regiment, basically, you know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, it'd be great to take a month off and get paid for it, you know what I mean? Or make so much money that, because we don't make that much money, you know what I mean? It's just like, if you get paid like enough money where you can take a month off and it's, it's not going to affect your mortgage or something,
I'm sure it will happen. You're making amazing movies, and hopefully you'll continue going from strength to strength, and you'll get your month off or 2 months off, and you can travel the world or relax, learn to play the banjo and learn another language and climb a mountain or whatever it is you want to do.
Be Hemingway and go to Spain.
Exactly.
Fly fish in a river.
in Spain.
Yeah.
You're going to have the best time in Spain. You should start planning it.
Oh, yeah? Have you been?
Yeah, I've been a few times. So I couldn't decide where to go once, and I went on a Mediterranean cruise. And it was really nice. Like, I went to a few stops in Italy, and I went to Spain and France and all over. But the place I fell in love with was Barcelona, and then I ended up going back there for a holiday the next year. And I've been to a few more places too. So yeah, Spain's a really nice place.
Okay, Spain. Okay.
Yeah.
Hemingway was onto something.
I think so. I know you can't say too much about it, but coming in 2021, Batman Soul of the Dragon, my understanding is it's set in the 1970s. And is there a martial arts movie?
It is. It's, I think, Gary Mariano, who's the publicist, is, I don't know, if you get me talking, I like to talk about things, because I love especially craft, but it's it is a martial arts movie. It's sort of like a, I don't know if it's right to say anymore, but it's based off of like those exploitation-ish kind of feel, but not entirely, but it's definitely the writer, Jeremy Adams, and Bruce. I think Bruce just loves the 70s. I think he will always go back to the 70s if he could, because that was a good time in his life. Like so many things in this, that nobody really cares about. But like, I think all the cars in it are basically cars that Bruce's family owned at one point, or most of them anyways. He would always be like, we need to have this car in it. We need to have that. And like, no, that's the wrong color,
Yeah.
And so I think this is definitely a love letter for Bruce. But Jeremy Adams is just like a kung fu nut. Like he loves like kung fu movies, old classic and the new ones and stuff like that. So this was they were at the voice recordings. I think they were just nerding out, him or just. But for Bruce, I think again he really wanted to stick to the 70s, but some of this I introduced a little bit of the 80s, a little bit of it in there, kind of Big Trouble in Little China. There's a touch of it in there, but yeah, it's like an adventure kung fu movie. Based in the 70s. 1973 to be specific as far as Bruce is concerned.
I heard about it, and I'm like, that's such an amazing idea for a Batman movie. It's an Elseworlds one as well, of course. I'm really excited to see it, and the setting and all that. It just sounds like a lot of fun to me. Yeah,
it's really fun. I think especially if you like, I don't know, or any kind of interest in the 70s and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like,
of course, yeah.
Yeah, we the music is very specific, or at least we tried to. We definitely pushed it into that. So it's all, it's very potent as far as the 70s is concerned.
I cannot say. It's kind of like spring 2021. I think I've seen online. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's I think it's supposed to be the first movie released of the year, I believe. Yeah. It's definitely a fun adventure, I think. So it's,
It does sound it from what I've read. Did you check out the DC fandom that happened?
I didn't, actually. I've been missing a lot of these, again, partially it's because of work and just stuff that's happening in my life, but I've been missing a lot of these sort of online events, some of them I actually wanted to sort of see, but I'm, again, it's just a thing that I'm kind of like, oh, I want to see that, but then like, oh shoot, that's over or something, or I'll read about it like, What is something fun happen or something cool happen?
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I didn't really know what to expect, but I ended up watching all 8 hours of it in a row without stopping. It was all good content too, and they made lots of announcements and there were trailers and stuff like that. Actually, I did a top 10 best moments of it on my show as well, which is kind of fun.
Check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully they'll do more stuff like that in the future. It's kind of nice because, you know, things like Comic-Con, you obviously have to be in America to go to it, and it can be really expensive, and there's these massive queues, whereas this was a free event. It was open to everybody in the world, and there's lots of big announcements, and it was kind of a nice way of doing it, I think.
Yeah, and I think I think it was very smart on their part, you know, especially, you know, not having something like a Comic-Con, but, you know, again, I think there's a lot of things that are, you know, people are experimenting with, or companies are experimenting with, and, you know, maybe this will prove to be something that's like, yeah, they should do this every year or something. You know?
Let's ask you too, out of all of the productions you've worked on your entire career, if you could pick one to be made into a live action film, which would it be, and who would you cast in it?
I don't like these questions. I mean, because I have a hard enough time even at casting meetings just to cast the voice, you know, because I think I just don't watch a lot of stuff, you know, and so I'm pretty useless at these casting meetings sometimes, you know. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's things that I like that maybe not everybody likes, because like Gotham by Gaslight is something that I'd like to see I'd love to see in a live action, just because I like the style of it, you know. But even when Gotham by Gaslight came out, like my cousin was saying, you know, who watches a lot of this stuff, but that's not his thing. He doesn't like these historical things, you know what I mean? So I kind of get it, but
the house is not that historical. I don't think much of it happened.
Yeah, but just the styling, I mean.
Yeah, the Victorian,
Right. So I don't know, but I like Gotham by Gaslight is definitely something stylistically that I really like, you know. I like these Elseworld type of things too, because I don't know, it's almost like, you know, like you're saying, it's like superheroes, it's not real. Like none of this happened, you know, but it's been around for so long, people almost make it seem like it's like there's a canon to it, or there's some sort of correct thing about it, you know. And I think like these Elseworld things, it just gives you the license to kind of like be imaginative again. Do you know what I mean? And just kind of hear a new story, you know. And there's the ideally, again, I keep going back to Killing Joke, it's like you kind of along for the ride a little bit more, because it's almost like, no, this is supposed to be an Elseworld. It's familiar in certain ways, but it's different, and hopefully you can accept the differences. But the difficult thing is, like, certain fans will keep trying to squeeze it back into sort of like what it's supposed to be. Do you know what I mean? Or what they think it's supposed to be. And you're like, you understand these aren't real people, you know, this is a made up thing, you know? And so I don't know. But I like the Elseworld stuff because, again, I think, you know, I have a certain amount of fatigue also of, like, you know, I even have, you know, coworkers and friends that are tired of Batman and they don't want to work on Batman anymore, you know? So I don't know, I get it, but yeah, I mean, like Gotham by Gaslight being, I think, one of them, you know, like Red Sun also, you know, again, they're the Elseworld ones that I'm kind of, I don't know, it's you know, I just feel like you're allowed to have more twists and turns, you know what I mean? Whether it's just a visual or whether it's something that's unexpected, you know. But again, I just wish that people could turn off their brains a little bit, you know what I mean? And just have maybe the filter up, but not be so inundated. Like Batman would never use guns or something like that, you know? You're like, this is an Elseworld, you know? Like, follow it and just, you know, if we did it badly, that's one thing, you know what I mean? If we don't, you know, make any sense of it, criticize me all you want, you know what I mean? That's my fault. But if we do it and there's a reason for it and it becomes something, like, just allow yourself to follow what, you know, this new narrative we're trying to, you know.
Because the thing is too, the thing that they love still exists. So the comic book, or say a film gets remade or something, they're still the original version, but this is just someone else's interpretation of it.
Right.
You know, it's even stuff like in Red Sun, the origin of Batman and Wonder Woman gets a new look towards the end of the film, and it's something I hadn't seen before in a film, and it's great that you can explore those avenues with these characters that you love, which still are very much the characters that you love, but they're in a new situation, and I think it makes it more exciting because you feel like literally anything can happen, which you don't necessarily always have in other films and productions.
Yeah, and, you know, I think just creatively too sometimes, you know, because we don't want to just, be like a wrist and just take something that's existing and just copy the panel, put it over, and just copy every single, every beat.
Yeah.
It's not even like, we're going like, oh, this is clearly wrong, or this is so stupid. Like, this should be more like this kind of thing. We just like to have the, the license to be a little creative ourselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, because sometimes, when we're writing it, sometimes, it's a thing where we just get excited because we're kind of like, we start seeing threads, we start making threads, and then we feel like it uplifts the product, or the story, and we just get excited about it. You know what I mean? It's like, we're not trying to, oh, I need to put my stamp on it or something like that, because a lot of times, sometimes, like, this doesn't really make sense to me, or like this thing was something that, like, I think it could be a little bit more strong if we did this kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So it's not like some ego thing that we're just like, well, we're just going to do something just for the sake of doing something,
Even, like Marvel movies, and as I said, I don't follow the comics too much, but I do know that there's certain big storyline beats that have happened in the films where it was a completely different character that did it, or whatever it was. And you just have to, accept that it's a new thing, and you're going on someone else's journey. And the important thing, I think, always is, did I enjoy the story they were telling me?
Right, yeah. Because, I mean, there's certain things too. It's just, because, it's a different time and it's a different age, and people consume things differently, and there's certain things that may be acceptable back then, but they're not acceptable now, and you don't entirely want to be like a revisionist and things like that, but there's certain things I think that you have to kind of honor, I mean, this is not so much, this is a very basic thing, but I remember, like, even working on Batman Year One, the end is really boring. It's, it's not about Batman fighting, like the Joker or something. It's Commissioner Gordon fighting basically Falcone's, kind of like dim nephew, what I mean? Who's a meathead, and it's like, that's not a spectacle. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, it's not that interesting. You know what I mean? But that's kind of what it is. He's, granted, he's trying to save his baby and all that kind of stuff. It's compelling in that way, but again, like that Batman Year One has been mined to get death so much, and so I remember when we were working on it, I was like, I was trying to put the mob pressure a little bit more on it. But again, at the time, I think Bruce wanted it to be like, no, it's supposed to be faithful to the comic, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think you could win either way. Sometimes you're faithful to the comic, and then people are criticizing you for like, why not just read the comic book, And then there's certain ones that are just like, why did you change the comic? Because, I love the comic. Even through Killing Joke and all that kind of stuff, is like, I think that you just gotta do it for what you think is best. You know what I mean? What's satisfying for us, and because I think we do try to honor it. We're trying to tell stories that make sense. We're trying to tie things together a little more. And I don't know, I mean, it's really sad, because I remember even at the end of Killing Joke, I mean, before it screened and all that kind of stuff, I remember, I think Bruce was pretty happy with it. He was just, and it's, I don't know, I just remember it's sad now, because it's almost like this thing that we don't talk about anymore, because, but I remember, him being, and that's the great feeling, obviously, because Bruce is such a legend. Whenever we sort of finish something and he's really happy with it, like Red Sun, he was super happy with, I remember, and this, Soul of the Dragon thing, I think Bruce is really pumped for it, like he loves the soundtrack, and he feels really good about it, but again, it's just, I remember like, again, even like All-Star Superman, when it came out, like when we finished it, I remember getting like an email from DC, and, and they were saying like, this one's really special, and I was thinking like, wow, is this going to be the one, is this one that, but then, I get people that's saying like, I remember this one Amazon review, somebody had said, Sam Liu did something that no villain in DC could ever do. He killed Superman, so you're like, wow, okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why, like, a lot of us, Bruce is right. You have to wear it close to the vest. You can't show how happy you are, because you never know. Like, some people are just going to hate it, even when you think that, oh, I think it's great,
I think all art is subjective, and all music and movies are too. You know, there are some movies that got 1 star that I've gone to watch anyway, and I've ended up loving them because my expectations were so low that I feel like, well, I actually really like these characters, and this was actually kind of a fun movie. And then other ones that are critically acclaimed, and say for some reason you don't get to see them when they first come out, you catch up with them years later, and you're like, that was really overhyped, you know, and your perception before you come into something massively influences your enjoyment of it. Or even, you know, if you had a bad day at work, or you just had an argument, or got a massive bill you weren't expecting, all that stuff can influence your enjoyment of something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And I think it might help too. So Marvel's kind of playing around with the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the idea that there's lots of different versions of these characters, and DC is about to do it with the new Flash movie, Flashpoint, which is the story it's copying off, has got 2 Batmans in it. And so I think if people start seeing all these things as separate worlds that coexist with the thing they love, and this is a different version of it, hopefully they will be more sort of willing to go on these adventures.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I remember, you know, somebody at the studio, you know, it might have been, you know, Sam Register, the president, you know, just about how like Batman has become one of these characters that it's, you know what I mean? It's not just one thing. There's different versions. It's like James Bond in a way, you know what I mean? It's like it's James Bond, but they understand that there's differences, you know what I mean? Like Brave and the Bold, you know, Batman animated series, you know, the Batman, and, you know, but yet some people want their canon, you know, they want to stick to their personal head canon as far as like what's right and what's wrong. And I guess like any fandom, they can be very passionate about it.
Yeah. Who's your favorite superhero character out of all of them? You can have Elastic Man, you can have Howard the Duck if you want.
Yeah. See, again, I love the more serious, you know, stoic sort of, you know, tragedy kind of ones and stuff, you know. I think Sandman again is my sort of favorite. People get this way maybe with books and, you know, series and stuff like that, but I think a lot of characters, sometimes they have a great like shtick, you know, but then it wears off after a while, after you've sort of seen it for so long. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So, I mean, you know, obviously there's periods where I loved like the X-Men, you know what I mean? Like, you know, reading it, that was the book that I read a lot when I was collecting, you know, and you know, even parts of Batman and stuff like that, or Superman. But then after a while, it's kind of like, you know, sometimes you get stories that aren't that very interesting kind of a thing, just because their situation is not that interesting, or there's, you know, what other kind of situation can you put somebody like that in and still have it interesting, you know? I mean, you know, I'm making it sound like it's easy to do, but it's incredibly hard, you know? But I just think like certain characters there, you know what I mean? Like the Sandman and stuff like that, you know what I mean? It's just, I think the canvas is so much bigger, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. But it's funny, I was just thinking about like the Flash though. Like his costume, I've always loved it as a kid. You know, I don't know if it's like the red or but I think it's so good. You know, like it totally like, you know, stands out.
Are you working on other projects at the moment? Are you working on multiple projects?
You know, there's a shift, you know, that happens every once in a while. You know, and it's and a lot of it sort of has to, you know, do with just the you know, I think it's more of it's a thing where they want to keep things fresh, and so they change things. They want to change things up and give a different voice sometimes, you know. And so I think, you know, the stuff that James Tucker and I were doing, and sort of Bruce is part of it, but again, Bruce is kind of he does like one a year or something like that, so he's not as restricted by it. But I think that they wanted something different, so they have a different creative team that's working on the director videos now. And so I think for a while, you know, I've been in limbo for a little while, so I've just been helping out on projects, you know, and doing post for, you know, the last big thing was, you know, obviously doing post for the Soul of the Dragon thing, right? And so but so far I'm ramping up I'm going to solo produce something. So we're kind of in the early parts of the process for that now. But beyond that, I'm just sort of helping out productions right now. You know what I mean? Because yeah, I mean, these things can be a little bit tricky. You know what I mean? Because again, as a student, you have to sell stuff, obviously. You know what I mean? Or internal. Who knows with the streaming thing now? Because I think the whole streaming thing and just how things are being distributed is challenging for a lot of companies and stuff like that. Because before it used to be when it was outlets like cable or some sort of network, that's where everything is dependent upon. Like, can you sell a project to them? The station or but now it's kind of opened in a way. But even though certain people have their own streaming services, they have to sort of figure out how much of this are they going to dedicate to this and that kind of a thing also, But even given that, there's other streaming services that might pick up things, like Animaniacs is on Hulu and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, and not on the, HBO Prime, whatever, plus thing. So I think there's a lot of things that, there's a potential of it, but then it's still restricted by how much money is involved kind of a thing, And so, anyways, as far as I'm concerned, I'm kind of, because of the shift, they knew who to put in, but now what are they going to do with us kind of a thing. So they've been keeping us, and, I think James and I are James is helping out, I think he was helping out on Superhero Girls. I don't know if he's still, doing the post stuff on that.
Yeah.
And so I just been sort of helping out on like Young Justice and things like that, while I'm also developing something. So, but James has been in development also. So.
I mean, you'll be very welcome back when we know more about what your next project is. If you'd like to talk about that later on.
Yeah. Hopefully when Soul the Dragon comes out, because a lot of times it seems like like they don't like you talking about it too much beforehand. You know what I mean? But then once it sort of comes out, like that's when now who wants to talk to you and stuff like that, and like that's when they line you up for interviews and stuff, things like that. So yeah. So you gotta wait, and then all of a sudden now go run. Yeah. So.
And then of course you have to let me know how you get on in Spain as well.
Yeah, if that happens.
I'm sure it has to happen. It's gonna be good.
Sounds fun,
I think so.
Yeah.
And then, so my final question, have you got any messages for people watching the Sarah O'Connell Show and your fans around the world?
I hope this interview is somewhat entertaining, and hopefully, I don't know, I speak from the sleeve a lot, and so is that even a term? So hopefully there's some insight, just, from my experiences and stuff like that. But, I'm very thankful of the people that support kind of what we do. And that, again, there's times I'm surprised sometimes that people, watch what we do. And so I'm very thankful and grateful. And especially this allows me to obviously do things that I love. So thank you, everybody. And thank you for sort of, putting my voice out into the internet a little bit, louder.
Family, thank you so much for coming on my show today. I've really enjoyed talking about your incredible career and all the amazing stuff you've worked on so far.
Oh, thank you. No, this is an absolute pleasure. You're right. This was fun. I'm an introvert by nature, so this stuff makes me nervous.
I really enjoyed talking to you about all this stuff, and I could keep talking to you about movies all day very easily. Yeah.
No, you're super intuitive. You know what I mean? And it's great that it's amazing that you were in animation. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't sure how I was going to go, but like your love for animation, knowledge of it, I was just like, wow, that's great. Yeah,
I mean, as I say, it was literally, as you mentioned, the month I graduated, Disney closed their studio, and as you said too, there was this massive rise in popularity of 3D animation, and my career just went in this random direction after that. And I do caricatures in my spare time, and I love to paint. When I get the chance to, I love art and all that good stuff. But getting to talk about animation and share the things I enjoy watching now is also good too.
Yeah. You should continue it. I mean.
Yeah. I mean, there is something I'm kind of working on in my spare time, but say like with my show, so I obviously plan the interviews, I write them, I host the show, then I edit it and I market it, and it's kind of 19, 20 hours a day sometimes I'm doing this. It's self-inflicted. I just kind of enjoy doing it. And I'm kind of the same with an animation thing I'm working on. So I've done all the backgrounds and storyboarded it and started animating it and stuff like that. But, you know, when you're kind of a perfectionist and you're working on every single frame yourself, it might be, you might see it in 30 years, you might see it in 6 months. It really depends how much time I get to work on it.
Yeah. No, but it's, I guess the bottom line is, you know, it just comes down to creativity, right? So you enjoy the creative process, you know, and so that's great. I think that's also another great thing just about like the modern age, you know, it's like, you know, there's so many ways to satisfy that itch, you know, and, you know, things that you may not have thought, you know, would be the thing that you need to do. But, you know, like you're saying, like, I could totally imagine, you know what I mean? Like, doing interviews and, you know, editing and all that kind of stuff, you know, it takes technical, but also a creative instinct to do. So it must be very gratifying. Yeah. So. Yeah,
it is. And it's kind of, there's a lot of problem solving, and I can be as creative as I want, and I can do as many interviews as I want, or as few as I want, you know, and that kind of thing. I loved it. I just like making stuff, basically.
Yeah. Maybe I should look into that, your job then.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not
done? Oh no. This is like the creating of a character. I've accidentally created my arch nemesis, who's going to have a bigger show than me. I mean, we could co-host is what we could do.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It'd be more like the Justice League. We wouldn't be enemies. We'd be working together.
I'm just the drummer in the background, so.
It'll be good. We'll work it out.
All right.
So, Sam Lee, thank you again for coming on my show today, and thank you to everybody watching at home. Be sure to share, subscribe, give this video a big thumbs up, and leave lots of lovely comments. And I'll see you all again soon for another episode of the Sarah O'Connell Show. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.